I'm one of those people that enjoy my exercise, but I don't like doing it socially. When I go jogging in a park that gets little to no activity from people, just because how wild it is. There are 3 different trails, and I try to run all of them without stopping for more than 30 seconds at a time. If I get too lazy, I penalize myself by doing them all over again. So, you get the idea that I'm out there by myself a lot. Well, I usually take it for granted that I'm the only one out there. One rainy day, I pushed myself to do some running, even though I didn't really feel like it. I tied my laces, did some burpees, and went for it, pushing myself extremely hard. I began to feel the runner's high when something I'll describe as unusual happened. I was pretty sure that I heard footsteps much heavier, mind you, coming directly behind me. But they were coinciding with my footsteps, and perfectly. I stopped. The sound of the other footsteps had stopped too. I looked around. There was no sign of anyone else on the trail with me. I felt chills well up, and a shiver shot down my spine. I shook them off and continued before my heartbeat had a chance to die down. As soon as I was back in pace, I heard the steps again, and they were once again timed perfectly to my own. I stopped. The steps stopped. Part of me wondering if it was the sound of my steps echoing and somehow being magnified by the woods. It was very strange and very eerie, and it's never happened to me when I was out there before. It wasn't an echo, because it happened at the same time that my feet hit the ground. I'd glanced around a second time. I never would have seen it had it been for what I can describe as glowing eyes. Everything else blended in with the dull earth tones of the forest, but the eyes gave me a reference point in which to discern everything else from. Once I saw the dim ember glow of the eyes, then I was able to make out the long ears that almost looked like horns, they were so sharp. Its scraggly fur was pulsating with each raspy breath, almost perfectly camouflaged in the backdrop of the forest. This, clearly, was a wolf that stood on 2 legs. It even had knees and legs like a human, bending forward instead of a dog that clearly was standing up, or trying to. It was poised to strike. I took a step backwards. It took a step forward in perfect time to my movements. I noped out of that forest so hard, running like a madman and feeling the hearing beast's pace mirroring my own. I made it out alive and unscathed. Only when my lungs were burning and I could not take another step did I look around and see if it was still following me. Either I lost it, or maybe it just lost interest in mimicking the pace and gait of a potential meal. I'm what they call an urban explorer. I break into abandoned buildings, take pictures, and film interesting things. And I post them online for people with the same fascination, and with all things abandoned, and rotting, and falling apart. You'd be amazed at the reach this sort of stuff has. Anyway, one time, I had broken into an abandoned mall in Miami. It appeared the perfect location, very remote. Once upon a day meant to draw in people that were on the highway. I found that lots of people had been there before me, so getting inside was pretty easy. It was a beautiful place for pictures. There was a lot of ceramic tile that was cracked, chipped, and missing. So it kind of had a Silent Hill 3 vibe. Look, Don't judge me. I don't get any creepy vibes until I try the Halloween store that dominated the rows of shops. I don't know which company used to run it, but it was by far the biggest shop in the whole place. The signs had all been taken down, but the decorations still remained. I guess they didn't have the time to move everything, or they didn't have the space to store it somewhere else. I found out real quick that the creepiest Halloween decorations are the ones that have been gathering in dust in a dark, condemned mall. Did I have a field day? There were real cobwebs on the fake cobwebs. I was looking at wrapping up and calling it quits when I heard a noise. Of course, you hear all kinds of things in abandoned buildings, mostly from the ceiling where all the birds are active. These noises I heard were coming on the ground level, right where I was. Nothing really spooks me. I've been doing this stuff for years, so I was very surprised to find the sound caused a serrated chill to drag itself up and down my spine. A very unusual experience. I reached for my flashlight, but fumbled it because of nerves, and it near died on impact to the floor. So, I took out my Zippo and clunked up a flame. After looking around, I saw that I was in a section of full-body costumes. You know, the stuff that would have cost a few $100. The masks for the suits were very, very well done, as in nerve-clawing terrifying. They all seemed to be looking at me, or looking at something only they could see in the glow of the flame. One suit stood out because of two things: how focused the eyes were, and they certainly seemed to be trained on me. Those same eyes were glowing with their own light. The suit was a towering wolf-like creature that had to be meant for two people to operate. There was no way one person was going to make this costume, or at least make it work believably. It was then the thing pulled back its lips in a snarl and showed its row of jagged teeth. And that's when I realized it was not a suit. It was very much the real thing. The awareness of it hit me like a towering ton of bricks falling. This was a real-life werewolf, hiding amongst the costumes in the abandoned store, and I didn't have anybody to tell about it. I was questioning if I was going to live long enough to tell anybody. So, I backed away slowly, keeping the lighter in front of me, gently waving it left and right. It was then focused on the flame, not I, so I tried to keep it that way. I don't know if I mesmerized it or what, but it didn't follow me more than 20 paces. I tried to leave in my panicked fashion so as to break it from its trance. So, yeah, I met a werewolf, and it let me go. And I know you're not going to believe me. I get it. It sounds like a cheesy ghost story. But I promise this is something that I've had to deal with. You're going to tell me that some of those old costumes took batteries, and sometimes that they last a very, very long time. Anyway, this is my story. You can take it or leave it. During one of my hikes, I heard out of a place the sound of a baby crying. At first, I thought it could have maybe been the cry of a coyote, but there was no mistaking it. There was a human child somewhere nearby, and it was making its presence known. Not wanting to be too conspicuous if things were really okay, I tried to circle the source of the sound instead of going straight for it. You can never be too sure. The sound was drawing me to a very thickly wooded area. I immediately thought that somebody was camping out, but I didn't see a fire or smoke, anything to suggest that there were adults nearby with a young child. My moral compass, however, wouldn't let me get far without making sure absolutely everything was okay or not. My anxiety retched when the baby's cry grew more urgent, the rhythm of its breaths faster, and its voice seeming to crack with effort. That's when I beelined it. I found myself diving into brush and thorns, stopping just short of a head that emerged from the top of some tall, thicker brush. It was the head of a weird-looking dog. I could see the neck that it was mounted on, and it seemed to be very thick, kind of like a bodybuilder, or maybe a big football player. Leaves and shrubbery concealed everything from the chest down. It was kind of like looking at the body of a gorilla, with hair as long and thick as, say, a bear. The crying seemed to be coming from the thing. I was both awestruck and puzzled. One, to see a giant humanoid wolf. Second, to think that it could be making the sound of a potentially crying infant. If I could believe what my eyes were seeing, perhaps its young were nearby, and they were making the sound. Whatever animal this was. It bared its teeth at me, and I took it for a sign of maternal protectiveness. Before I could get too far, it ducked its head, and I heard a rustling as the crying faded away in the distance. It later on hit the news that some campers at a park very close to where I had been hiking had woken up to find their infant daughter was missing. She had just disappeared the night before, and there's no way she could have toddled off all by herself. She was barely 3 months old. I wanted to be an informant so badly, but how do you tell anyone that their daughter was last spotted with a towering animal that walks on 2 legs? Sharing a story so far-fetched would basically be incriminating myself. I don't know. This happened a while ago, as of writing this, so I'm still debating if I could even take my story anywhere. I guess I practically am by sharing it with you. If I can stomach telling you, then I'll probably go ahead and tell the police what I saw and hope for the best. Wish me luck. I can't fathom telling a story about dogmen without telling a story about dogs. I had an aging male husky named Grimy. He had that heterochromia. You know, the 2 different colored eyes. He called the forest on my property in Vermont his own little doggy empire. News reached me that there had been a rash of wild coyotes that didn't have any qualms with picking on domestic dogs for food. So, I was afraid to let Grim wander too far. Against my basic principles as a dog owner, I chained him up so he couldn't wander off into the woods like he was used to. He didn't like that, none too much at all. One evening, I went out to check on old Grim, and I thought I could hear the wail of coyotes. Actually, that's exactly what I heard, and the sound was coming from where I had kept him chained up. I cursed myself for not thinking about this as a possible outcome, and so I rushed to my dog's rescue with a heavy shovel in my hand. I feared I was too late, and that would be the shovel I used to bury my dog instead of rescuing him. Sure enough, I came over to him just in time to see a bunch of the wild tramps run off when they saw me coming and making noise. I thought for sure that I'd see Grim crumpled up and torn open, but I didn't see him at all. The chain looked like it had been snapped, but that only could be possible if it were done with cutters. What thing on this earth could possibly snap an iron chain like that? I heard Grim whimpering. The sound interrupted my thoughts. I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from though, so I spun around to see my dog in the clutches of a creature I can only describe as a monster from the stinking pits of hell itself. It looked exactly like a man, crossbred with a mean dog. The head was ferociously wolvish. Everything else had a very brutish human aspect to it. The arms like tree trunks that held onto my dog very firmly. Grim looked at me. I couldn't read him. I was too worked up to tell how much terror he was seized by. He wasn't exactly relaxed, but he wasn't panicking either, and this threw me. He tried to wiggle free at the sight of me, and just like that, the monster let him go. It looked at me and bared its fangs, but other than that, I didn't do anything. And this thing then slowly walked backwards into the woods, with its eyes slowly and heavily trained on me, as if making sure I wouldn't move a muscle. When it was clear that I wasn't going to chase it, it ran off. Before submitting this story, I did do a little bit of preliminary research, seeing what kind of experiences people have had with humanoid dogs. I'm guessing this would be under the DOGMAN category, correct? Assuming all these stories are true, it looks like it's not uncommon to have near misses with these creatures. But it looks like in this instance, the thing let me go, and my dog too. And it even seemed to perceive that my dog had a relationship with me. I have no idea what kind of instinct this understanding was working in. I guess I should consider myself lucky, and my dog even luckier. English is not my first language, so forgive me if I goof up and typing something wrong. One of the local gangs basically forced me into a secluded servitude. Namely, I had to pay a certain amount of money every single week if I wanted to live. They had me clearly outnumbered, so who was I to argue? For the record, this didn't happen in America. This was in a rural area in South America, long ago. Business was good for the most part, so I didn't have to worry about having their money. One day, I kind of did have to worry. They informed me they were raising my rent, and I told them they were ridiculous. They dragged me into an abandoned subway tunnel, or what I thought was a subway tunnel. I was locked up for 2 days in a closet, without food or water. I probably would have been in there much longer had it not been for the volunteer that decided to let me out. At first, I thought he was on drugs, because his eyes were open and his jaw was shivering. The man just could not speak. He told me in Spanish that he was sorry, and he begged me to ask God to forgive him, saying something about how he didn't want to end up like the others. Even though my family was heavily Catholic, I wasn't a religious man, but I humored him and told him that I would. He released my bonds, more or less, and dropped me onto the cold pavement. He ran away like he was being chased. It was very peculiar behavior, and I wondered what had gotten into him. As I was staggering out of these dugout tunnels, it occurred to me that he hadn't stuck around in order to escort me past his homeboys. Were the rest of them just as repentant as he was? Were they going to put me right back in the closet? The full import of what he said when he mentioned not ending up like the others didn't hit me until I saw the body of one of his friends lying in an expanding pool of blood. The further I went, the more bodies I saw. It occurred to me that my savior might have snapped and killed every one of his friends. But that was highly unlikely, especially when I saw the conditions some of these bodies were in. And mind you, these were heavily armed guards, automatic rifles, armor, you name it, essentially militant. And down here in South America, where many of them were cartel members, pretty much having access to anything they needed. Many looked like they had been attacked and killed to death by a wild animal. Just as I found some stairs leading out of the tunnels, I heard animalistic noises coming from behind me. I turned around and saw a hulking dog that it somehow developed the ability to walk on its hind legs, clutching a dead gang member in each paw. One of them seemed to still be alive and gibbering something in Spanish under his breath. I thought I was hallucinating everything, but everything else suggested that this was very real. I couldn't even think to hallucinate or be half delirious. These two men were then dragged away, barely alive and coated in blood. When I made it outside, I found a way to contact the police and told them about what happened. Although down here in South America, good luck. They had believed me that somebody else murdered all the cartel, but they had a hard time believing that it was some kind of jungle dog monster. The detectives that came out to look at the scene in person were a little less skeptical, but still skeptical nonetheless. Trust me, I wish that it had been just a hallucination. Since moving to America, I've since learned more of these creatures. I think they're called dogmen. But again, this happened many years ago, in northern South America, in a country where luckily the cartel hadn't quite become part of the government and police yet, although their militant force was very strong, hence part of the reason why I was told to pay rent to them in the first place. I'm just glad to be in a country that's free now, and long away from that. Oh, and I should make mention that this was when I was in my early 20s. I'm now in my early 40s. I'm an adult now, but the story that I'm about to tell you, although it happened when I was a kid, will never leave me. It is one of the most scariest encounters I have ever had, and for years, it's kept me awake at night. I was 10 at the time. My brothers were 6 and 13, and we, along with our parents, were off on a wonderful adventure. Well, that's how it felt to us. In reality, we were in a truck pulling a trailer in which we thought we were going to spend a few days driving around, finding fun stuff to do in the day, and cool places to park at night. It was on the way back from one of the fun places, a carnival where I'd finally gotten to experience some of the big kid rides, and on the lookout for some place to camp for the night when it happened. It was early evening, around 8:30 p.m., and since it was summertime, it was still pretty light outside. My little brother was fast asleep, having been worn out from all the fun, and I remember thinking I would likely also doze straight off as soon as my dad found somewhere to park. That was when there was a really, really loud bang, which came from the very rear of the trailer. I remember my dad stopping and cursing, and my mom simply insisting he get out and check, as possibly a deer had ran into the back. After all, she was a real sucker for any animal, stray or not. She didn't want to think that it might be lying out there hurt. So, my dad opened the door and told us all to stay in the truck whilst he took a look. We did, but of course we scooted around so we could see exactly what was happening. After a couple of minutes, he came back to the window to talk to Mom. I remember he looked kind of puzzled. There's a huge dent in the back of the trailer, but I don't see an animal anywhere. I can't think of a single animal that can make a dent like that and just walk away. Of course, we all wanted to go out and see that, since this was the 70s and far less traffic on the roads. This was also in the middle of nowhere. It was highly unlikely another vehicle would come steaming through. So we all went round back to the trailer, except my brother Jimmy, who was somehow managing to sleep through the entire show, and oohed and awed about the size of the dent. My dad may have used a few more expletives here, and what on earth could have caused it. That was when we heard a very, very low-pitched growl. Immediately, my mother told us to get back in the car and lock all the doors. She came back in too, whilst Dad stayed for just a moment. He wanted to know what the cause of the damage was from. Mom was yelling, "Jerry, get back in the car." But for some reason, my dad moved closer to the side of the road where the growling was coming from. We were all turned around in our seats to be able to see, and that was when we saw this thing. Emerging from the trees at the side of the road came a rather enormous-looking creature. It was taller and broader than my dad, and covered in this gross, thick, black hair. It stood up on two legs like a person, and had long, dangly arms. Then was the head. The head was huge. It looked way out of proportion with the body, even though that was massive too. Oh, and it was the head of a dog. That's right. This thing that came out of the trees growling at my dad made a huge dent in the back of the trailer, with no damage to itself, and was a virtual giant standing on two legs. Needless to say, we learned a few more new curse words as Dad yelled and ran back to the car. He slammed the door and put his foot down on the gas pedal. Bam! We were out of there. Dusty. I kept staring back at the side of the road. Seatbelts weren't really a thing back then. It just stood there watching until we rounded a nearby bend, and we couldn't see it anymore. We drove and drove that whole night, way further than the intended stop, but my dad wanted to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. I sure as hell don't know exactly what it was, or how something like that even existed in our world. But with God as my witness, I tell you to tell you, it was real, and I will never forget it. Most of the stories that I listen to or read about of people seeing unexplained stuff happen to them a long time ago, well, I don't doubt their credence. This particular story happened to me only a few weeks back. I'm not 100% sure exactly what I saw, because I enjoy reading about this stuff. My brain just went there rather fast, than searching for a logical explanation. However, I'm pretty certain that I saw a dogman. I was driving back from work one evening, down a road that I use every single day. That's when I noticed a shape on the verge, not too far off in front of me. Whatever it was, it seemed kind of slumped over, and to be honest, my first thought was that it could be a bear. Although I've never seen a bear here ever, there are bears in my country, so it wasn't too much of a stretch, and this thing appeared to be pretty big, despite looking like it was crouched down. I wasn't exactly afraid, but definitely cautious, as you know. You don't want to make a bear cross, right? So, I moved the car over a little, as there wasn't any of cars about right then, and slowed down, as to not spook whatever it was. As I got closer, I could see that it was indeed crouching down. But it almost seemed to be kneeling, as if its arms were folded in front of it. I'm sure that sounds weird, but that's what it looked like. Almost like this thing was praying, or at least in some sort of stance that you might see in a church. I was definitely thinking that I was nigh on a certain bear, and that it couldn't do that when I got close enough to see exactly what this creature was in its weird position. And it was a creature, all right, but it wasn't a bear. It appeared to be a dog, a very huge dog. It must have been almost as big as me, and as I said, it was kneeling, so it wasn't even at its full height. I reckon if I had been standing, it would have been around 7 feet tall, if not more. The arms, as I have said, were placed upon its knees, and from my vantage point, I could see it has absolutely massive paws. Of course, the most important part was the head. Very similar to that of a German Shepherd, actually. And it seemed to be just staring. It didn't move. And for just a second, I truly wondered if it was just some brilliant, elaborate prank, although I couldn't think for the life of me why. But then, as I drove past it, staring at it, it indeed blinked. You can bet I put my foot down on the gas pedal and shot off like a bat out of hell. I did keep checking in my rearview mirror. The thing never moved. I for sure believe that it was indeed a dogman. I just have no idea why it was just sitting there in plain sight, as if it was waiting for something or someone. I've been back up and down that road several times since then, and I haven't seen any trace of it again. I'm currently a night security guard, and let me tell you, I have some pretty crazy sights that I've had over the years. If I believed in the supernatural, I'd be white from all the ghosts that I've witnessed. But you see, I don't believe. No matter how spooky something looks in the dark or on camera, come morning time, there usually is always a feasible explanation. But this one story I'm going to share that doesn't involve spooks. This one, I ain't got no explanation for. It was around 2 a.m., and time for one of the many perimeter checks that I make during my shift. Some of the other guards just sit and watch the monitor, but despite doing this for a long time, I still think that I'd struggle to stay awake, just sitting there all night. So, I like to get outside no matter what the weather and stretch my legs and get some fresh air, all while making sure that everything is A-OK. There's nothing particularly valuable on site, but the reason they got us patrolling is because they keep some pretty nasty chemicals, and you don't want somebody breaking in and stealing them. That particular night, I can remember, was very cold, a real bitter wind, and even through my eyes were drooping enough to tell me that I needed to get up and out there and wake up. I was still wishing I could just be lazy for once and stay inside, as I was freezing outside. I was about halfway around when I heard a noise from just outside the fence. Now, it would take a real idiot to try and break through an electric fence, but we do get the odd animal disturbance when something comes nosing about. I could hear a sort of snuffling and panting, and was 99% sure that my visitor was not of the human variety. So, I flashed my torch around, not bothering to reach for my gun or the radio, as there's no point if it was just a curious raccoon or something. I couldn't see anything, but I could still hear the panting, and then a low growl sound. I still wasn't scared or even worried. Why would I be? I had a 10-foot tall electric fence covered in spikes and barbed wire fence in front of me. Even the angriest raccoon ever wasn't getting over that. Whatever it was doing out there, it seemed to be getting itself all rifled up. I could still hear this planty low growl noise, and now it seemed to be moving backwards and forwards the length of the side of the fence we were at, with some real speed building up. I caught just a glance of it with my flashlight, and for the first time, I remember feeling just a little bit of anxiety as I realized this wasn't no raccoon. It couldn't be, as it seemed way, way bigger. As I said, it was moving really fast, like sprinting up and down. But then it stopped and faced the fence, growling. I shone my light right onto it. Now, of course, I shone my torch at the level that I'd expected an animal would be, and all I could see was legs. Just 2 of them. As I slowly raised the flashlight up to my own eye level, I saw what was out there, It was a dog, because it had the head of a dog. Much kind of like a Doberman Pinscher, actually. It was curled up, and very sleek looking. But this dog was freaking huge, and stood up on two legs. Not like a wimpy old dog that stands up and begs. This was fully erect and upright, chest pumped out, huge glowing yellow eyes, its tongue nearly lolling out of its huge jaws. And then it ran, again, as quick as a flash. Now, as I said, I have seen plenty of ghosts and orbs and all that kind of crap, and they all have had a very reasonable explanation. But this, well, you tell me. Whenever I usually hear about any sort of creature sighting, it is almost always a one-off. It might be a stretch of road that person takes every day, but they never see this thing again. Or they go back in like an hour just to check, but there's no evidence that it was ever even there. I'm not saying that I don't believe these encounters are true, but wouldn't it seem even more believable if somebody saw one of these creatures pretty much every day? Well, welcome to my world. I live in cornfield country, and am a part in a huge working farm. I can oftentimes go for days without seeing another human, aside from family. But we never get lonely. There is another family that lives somewhere around here. We presume somewhat past the furthest cornfield, where the trees are. Only, they ain't the human kind of family. They're what I call dog people. Now, the stories that I've heard and encounters I have listened to all describe what people call a dogman. I don't know whether that is intentionally gender specific, or whether they just ain't getting too close to be able to tell if said creature is indeed a dog man or a lady. But unless they have some kind of way of reproducing, that is, unlike all other mammals, then I could presume they are indeed dog people. Because one day, the dog mama and papa brought along a young'un. Now, if you're thinking I just about sound crazy, I can't say I blame you, but it is the truth. Most days, for going on 3 years now, we see them, these dog people. They're about the size of us, maybe a bit shorter, bodies covered in hair, a dark sort of brown color. Again, a lot of people describe them as being all matted and dirty, but these look like they take care of themselves somewhat. They walk upright just like people, but you can tell they have hocks, because they're kind of bent at the knee joint, and they got very long arms. But instead of human hands, they don't quite have dog paws. They kind of resemble more like raccoon hands with sharp long claws. Of course, the thing that really makes these things stand out, if body hair ain't enough, are their heads. Big, overly sized dog heads, with very intelligent animal eyes. They got the small pointy ears on the top of their heads, long snouts, and big, big jaws. I'd be willing to bet any house how many sharp teeth they have, but they've never bared their teeth at us. We ain't ever given them a reason to. They kind of just cock their head to side sometimes, and listen. Obviously they don't talk back. I've heard them pant, whine, howl, but never growl at us. Now, it's not like I invite them into our home for dinner. I ain't out there making idle chit-chat with them neither, but most days they come with invisibility. Sometimes it is just to the perimeter of the field, so I can barely see them. Sometimes they come up much closer, stand there, appearing to listen in for something. They're usually always in a pair, but lately, there's only been one. When he appeared on his own, he never came too close, like he was being extra careful, just in case now he didn't have the safety in numbers. We wondered where his partner was, but just got on to living life. Then, one day, the other ones showed back up. Only this time there were 3 of them. Since then, sometimes just the one turns up often, if it is all 3. They don't tend to come quite so close now, maybe just displaying that innate sense of protection. So there you go. I know this isn't the most exciting story about dogmen you'll ever hear. They have never tried to attack us, and have never acted to frighten us. Usually more just an attitude of, you stay on your side, and we stay on our side. Not that we are careless, of course. I ain't saying I'd let my grandkids run over and try to rub their tongues or nothing. But these creatures do exist. And now, I have seen with my own eyes that they are capable of procreation. I am sure that there's going to be more and more of them around, after seeing young'uns. Before I forget to mention, beyond these large cornfields is miles and miles of thick forest that my family has owned for a very long time. I want to say it's probably 200 plus acres. I don't know the exact number, but I know it's less than 300 and more than 200. And that borders up against state game land. So, it's very possible they could be coming through there to here, for feeding or whatnot. I know there's also a very large population of deer that surround the very backside towards the edge of the cornfield, right where they go through. It makes sense if the corn brings the deer, and so the predators come after the deer. While I've never really gone exploring into the woods much, since I was never a hunter, more of a farmer, and a guy with a green thumb, I can't say that I've ever found anything out of place going on the back side of the property. Because our corn does draw in so much deer, it would make sense that these animals pay really no attention to us at all, and in fact, don't even show any hostility or aggression towards us. I believe that's for a reason. No, they don't want to be buddy-buddy, but what they do want is to be very close to their food supply.